the bell. Thank you all for being here. I'm Nancy Olson, and it's a great pleasure to have the chance to moderate this panel. And we might have a few others come in. I know the restrooms were in need and a little busy, but I am so happy and honored that you all wanted to spend some time with us this morning. And I wanted to say that this is going to be a very casual, safe environment to ask some questions that you might have. And this is just a wonderful opportunity because we have three incredible experts here with us. And to begin, I wanted to go ahead and let them introduce themselves and talk a little bit about their area of specialty. And I'm going to start on the end there with Jill.
Hi, I am a psychologist. I have worked for the last about 30 years for the Veterans Hospital in the field of addictions. And before that, I sort of specialized in family and children, and I've been in practice now for about 30 years.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Marissa, and I am a social worker. So if you see those four letters after my name, LMSW. So I'm not a clinician, full disclosure. I may have earned some hours in clinical work, but these are the experts in mental health. But I have worked a lot with children and families and in the mental health field. So probably the most overt application is, I know some of y'all from last year because I spoke at this event, but I used to work at the Hope and Healing Center doing mental health trainings for churches all around Houston. We actually did one in Indiana and then an online training program. So I certainly integrate mental health into all that I do. I'm currently working at the Jewish Community Center, and I run a volunteer program for seniors to mentor kids at Head Start centers, schools, and so mental health on the surface may not be part of that, but it absolutely is. So a little bit about me.
I'm Stacy Sadler, and I'm a trauma therapist. I work in the Riverstone area in a psychiatrist's office, but I'm not part of the psychiatrist's office. And I'm a licensed professional counselor with certification for trauma therapy. And so I have a private practice by myself, and I work a lot with partners of people who have repeatedly been unfaithful. And there's a lot of trauma for spouses of people who have had betrayal trauma. So I also work with abuse victims and people with anxiety, depression, things like that.
Well, as you can see, we have just a wide range of knowledge and skills, and I know that we're going to have a great discussion here over about the next 45 minutes. So when we look at this overall topic of wellness, we live in a society where we hear a lot about our health and how we can improve our well-being. We're concerned about our diet, and we're concerned about how much sleep we get, and what water do we drink, and are we getting exercise, and what is the best exercise? And I think we are really bombarded by ways to improve our health. But it is interesting that we talk so much about our physical health, but our mental health is just as important, yet we don't tend to maybe spend quite as much time on that or talk about it as openly. And so our goal today is really to create an opportunity for us to ask questions and to hear ideas. We had a panel this morning, and I took so many notes because I really learned a lot about different resources out there and ways that we can really learn and ways we can improve our mental health, which obviously improves our overall health. So why is this such a big problem? I mean, why is it that we can talk about, the latest diet or the latest exercise craze, but we don't want to talk about really how we're doing, inside? There is a stigma attached to it. And it's really a big problem because a recent survey by the World Health Organization says that 1 in 4 people, that's 1 in 4, will experience or be affected by a mental health or neurological disorder at some point during their lives or our lives. So it's a very common thing, and we're all going through it. And I think that's an important thing to realize. It's very reassuring, and I think also really comforting to be able to connect with others and say, wow, I'm feeling that too. So this is an issue that we as a society need to really spend more time on. Why such the stigma? Well, Sometimes it's access to care, sometimes it's just that embarrassment, sometimes it's cost, sometimes it's not knowing who to go to, or what resource, or even where to start. And so those are some of the questions and topics that we're hoping that we can do to kind of take away some of that stigma today and give you some opportunity to hear from some highly trained professionals on some information, and hopefully you'll walk away with some news you can use. The format this morning is going to be very open and very easy. You received some cards when you walked in. As I said, you can write those questions down. And if you do have them, I'm going to have a little basket around here. So, oh, there, Jill's got the basket.
Start it around.
And so we will, and then you don't have to write a question down. If something comes up later and you raise your hand, and we'll just see how it all goes. But I'm going to go ahead and get things started with just an opening, really basic question. I'm going to go all the way through the panel. On some of these questions, ladies, I think it's just easiest, somebody might have an area of expertise in something, and go, I'll chime in and I'll answer that question, and somebody might dovetail off of that. But for this opening question, and Jill, I'll start on the end with you, it's what does a mental health checkup look like? When you say I'm going to really see, how am I doing? We go to the doctor and have a physical. What does a mental health checkup look like?
It could be so many different things, and I kind of wish I'd taken notes on the first panel, because they were so brilliant, you really. But it can really kind of be any sort of thing. I mean, I was thinking about this, and through the course of my life, there have been different times that I've prioritized different things. There's different seasons to one's life. And for the longest time, I was like actively anti-exercise. If you talk to me about how exercising was the thing I ought to do, I would say, well, but people get hurt when they're, running, But I had this thing in the back of my mind that over time started growing. And when I found out that Fitness Connection was only $10.77 a month, and they had these classes that I could go to kind of whenever I wanted to go to, then it kind of got me in thinking about it. And so for me, a mental health checkup is kind of like anything, that there's something that's sort of on your mind, and you're kind of wondering if you should look into it more, and maybe you want to put your toe in and give it a try, and you hear about some opportunity, maybe it's a wellness class like this morning, and you're just kind of curious, and I would just encourage people to follow your curiosity. And so if you're thinking about it, you're wondering about it, listen for it, kind of open your eyes up, open your mind up, ask God to guide you, and He will. And so for me, a mental health checkup, what would you do when you talk to that person? You would be talking to them about your concerns, basically. And it can be a whole range of things. And it may be that you're concerned about somebody else, but you're wanting to do what you can do to manage the best you can to deal with that situation. So there's a variety of different reasons that a person might go in that direction, just like, what led me to Fitness Connection. And that's where I would start.
Marissa?
I think that's a perfect, actually, because the word you said is curious, and I think that has been a huge one for me. I think to fuel my own wellness, I think it's just to really look inward at first. I mean, obviously I have my own therapist and my own process for doing things, but to really start with getting curious about okay, what am I feeling? What are my thoughts? How am I acting? What's changed? And I think really being curious instead of judging and shaming myself for when things are kind of shifting in the wrong direction. So I think having that self-compassion, to start with that, I think has been really important for me, to self-assess and realize, okay, what's feeling off? One thing I think that has been a big shift for me in the past probably 2 years since I restarted therapy is how am I feeling in my body? I think we often leave that feeling out of it, and at least for me, the trauma-informed perspective that I've integrated into my work with kids and child welfare and abusive situations, let alone looking back at my own history of that, is, okay, where am I holding this tension? And so kind of doing a body scan of okay, I feel this tightness in my chest. Where do I think that's coming from? One, I've been feeling really anxious. about my mom's health. Okay, so what can I do to release this? What things can I do to physically check in and notice where that pain is? And then also look inward. But I think when you're doing a mental health check with a therapist, I think it looks like for me being vulnerable and being in a space with someone that I can really be open with. For me, my first therapists I've had were super helpful at helping me manage my symptoms, and I was open with that, or with them. But kind of, for me, making that shift of like, okay, well, how can I move from managing to healing, and doing a lot of that inner work and being honest with myself through that. So mental health checkups I think have changed a bit for me, but it starts with symptoms and moves towards, okay, well, what's the root of that? What's the root that really kind of hits home that I need to work on healing?
And you're right, identifying the root cause. A mental health professional has the ability to oftentimes, and I've had this experience personally, where they can ask a question or bring up something you just didn't even think was the cause. And I think that's where their training is just so spot on, and it's an amazing thing when you go, wow, I didn't even think of that. So I think you bring a very good point up about finding the root cause of really what might be what's causing these other symptoms. Stacy, what about your thoughts on this mental health check? Mental health checkup, that's a hard thing to say, isn't it?
I think I was going to say about the same thing, is some people call because something's bothering them. I'm just not motivated about things. Oh, I just am so anxious I can't drive, I can't go somewhere, I can't do something. Or I'm worried about a family member, or something just doesn't seem right. And so when they come in, I'm going to ask them a series of questions about their life. I'm going to ask them about how their family relationships are. I'm going to ask them about their health, physical health, if they're on any medications. I'm going to ask them about relationships and who they have in their lives. Sometimes it's just a problem of isolation, truly. And then I'm going to ask them about their family history, the family they grew up in, and then the family they're in today, and what those relationships were like. And then I'm going to talk to them about their spiritual resources. Who do they have in their lives or what do they have in their lives to draw strength from? And from that, we can start developing goals of what the person wants to accomplish in therapy. But a lot of times, like Nancy was saying, it's real clear to me that something from their past or in their current environment, we have a lack of objectivity. We've just thought it's normal. We just thought it's normal to live like this, or we thought it was normal for our family to do this thing. And someone objective comes in and says, yeah, no, that's jacked up. That's not okay. And these people, it's really hard if you have developed a coping skill for dealing with a certain situation to back out of the way you've done things for a long period of time. And so I think you're right in saying vulnerability is there and trust. So it's a lot about trusting the person that you're talking to and being able to be open and honest about what's going on in your life.
Yes.
For your situation, people coming to you, they need help. But I know a young man, the problem is he will not get out to ask for help. Then how are you going to do it? You can't, even we made an appointment for him, he will not, we cannot drag him out. So in that situation, what to do with it?
Well, I was going to say, I think that's a very good point. I want to make sure everybody could hear. The idea, the question basically was, we know we can be aware of our own situation, but what happens if there is someone in our lives who we feel needs professional help? How can we help them seek counseling or help?
We cannot drag him out of the house.
Yeah. If only. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's a tough situation. I think there's several answers to that, and again, we're going to answer these questions pretty generally, but again, specific help because it's like, what have you tried, what have you not tried? And maybe it's a case of boundary setting. I'm not going to continue to enable this behavior if you're not going to get help. Requirement for living in, I've had that requirement in my home, that you have to have mental health help if you're going to live in my home. I'm not going to continue to watch you decline. That's not normal. It's not okay. So maybe it's that, and maybe it's, and at this point, I think it's about you getting help for you, just like how to manage that. It's really hard to watch somebody slide downhill and not be able to do anything. It's a really powerless feeling. So I think that's where you start, is getting help for you in managing your own emotions about it and coming up with solutions.
Marissa, did you have a thought?
Absolutely. I mean, I think what you said is perfect, that, you know, we can only control ourselves. And even though I can think of many people in my life that I have tried to stay and be present for and be patient with, but ultimately I cannot control, they're going to open that door themselves. And so the more I think we can focus on, you know, our role as caregivers in making sure our needs are being met, that we're being supported, you know, in this complicated role of trying to help someone who may not want to help themselves. There's support groups for people just like that, family members, friends who just talking to somebody who's also experiencing that can be so freeing. Like, just to be in a room of people that know what you're going through and being able to bounce ideas off each other and support each other, I think is incredibly important, and we often overlook, right? I think people who are more drawn, like myself, to helping, it can be really easy to focus just on helping other people, but what about myself? What fuel am I putting in my tank to sustain me for that work of helping? But also, we're just as important. You know, making sure that we're able to focus inward as well. And sometimes, at least in my experience, has also been leading by example. You know, being able to model for other people. Okay, well, I may be talking a lot about, oh, you need help, therapy for everybody, therapy for everyone, but when did I go to my therapist in like the 5 years when I was struggling? You know, really making sure to model that for people, I think helps really address that that stigma that I think is internalized, whether we realize it or not. Stigmatized in families, in faith spaces, in our culture, period. We like to go, and do all the things for all the people, but again, what are we doing for ourselves? And so I think being able to model that and receiving help, unfortunately, that's all we can do. And I think whenever that person is ready to talk, being sure to approach it with that curiosity and concern versus, oh, you need help for this, and this, here's all these facts about, you know, depression. You know, for some people, they hear facts and want to get help. Some get defensive, and it's hard to have a conversation if they feel like something's wrong with me. So the more we can do to kind of disarm that and approach them with curiosity and concern, I think it's not the magic fix, but I think it can be helpful.
I think this is a question, I don't know if you wrote this or not, but one of the cards that I received here is the best way to help those in a crisis without making it a crisis for yourself. And I think that's an important point. How to learn boundaries and keep them without hurting the other person. Is that something you might want to address, Jill? Is that?
I'll give it a shot. It's really being aware of how are you doing and what part are you playing, and taking care of yourself. I remember one time in graduate school, I had a friend that was in some serious trouble, and I did a whole dramatic, you know, I'm going to go rescue him, and I'm going to knock on the apartment, and it turns out, I don't even remember how the day ended, but in terms of him, but what I remembered about me is Jill, really, did you have that day to just go off and do this big rescue thing? Shouldn't you have been working on your dissertation? So it's like, what? Not to say that you didn't have a problem, you did have a problem. And there was a time or a place for me to get engaged, but there was also a time for me to just like, am I doing what I'm supposed to be doing to take care of myself? And so it's a matter of sort of balancing. Am I using his problem to distract me from my own? Or, not that I didn't have great sympathy for him, he was a great friend. It's just trying to be aware of your own part you're playing and how you're doing yourself, and are you taking care of yourself, or am I taking care of myself? It's all very tricky, especially when there's crises. And sometimes you have to decide, okay, this one, this is how I have to behave in this particular situation given all the factors. I'm not saying you turn a deaf ear and you don't do the right thing. Sometimes the right thing is hard to figure out. And that's really where it really does take a village. And so whatever person you're concerned about, even yourself, be talking with other people, even if it's not a therapist, about how you're doing, because it's good to have a sounding board, a couple of good trusted friends, getting a couple of different opinions, and then potentially a therapist as well. It's just, it's not, man was not meant to be alone. Women aren't meant to be alone either, hence our gathering. We're not meant to do this alone.
I do think, though, I'd like you all to address it, is when do you have a situation that it really is maybe an emergency? I mean, how do you know that this is a time when you go, well, I'm going through a tough time, but I'll get through it, or I think it's even harder if you're watching someone. Do you want to address that? Because I do
Maybe I'll
think
give it a little piece and then I'll pass it on to my colleagues here. There's an amazing number, and I work at the VA, so I've always thought that it was something that was specific to veterans, but a couple years ago I learned it's available to everyone. And it's on one of your handouts, it's on the back of one of them, the one with all the boxes. And it's the suicide or crisis hotline. Wherever you are, there are a couple more here.
Save it on your phone.
Yeah, save it on your
over
phone. Wherever you are, United States, 24/7, 1-800-273-8255. That number again, 1-800-273-8255 or TAOK. That connects you directly with crisis counselors. And in conversation with them, it's determined that there's a crisis. They can connect directly with ambulance, police, whatever it is. And so you can get a response. Even if you're in Louisiana and they're in New York, you call this number, they will know the New York people to get in touch with. It's an amazing resource. If you happen to be a veteran, or know a veteran, at the end of the 1-800-273-8255, you press 1 and you go to the veterans line, because there's a specific line that then accesses the VA resources. It's a great number to just have if you're ever feeling like, okay, this is really not okay, and it's really more than I can handle.
Jill, can you say it one more time?
1-800-273-8255.
really good
And
information.
that's not necessarily just for suicide.
It's not, it's a crisis hotline.
Okay.
They started out calling it a suicide, but they
Right.
changed it to crisis.
Okay.
And even if it's not you, it's somebody else, you can call about somebody else you're worried about. It's a generic crisis hotline number nationwide. I'm a big fan.
Jill,
Yes.
I just want to add something to what you said regarding helping somebody when you are busy, you got your own agenda. From a Christian point of view, I feel personally that we are all called to do that for our brothers and sisters, and even for those who do not even know well. It could be a neighbor that I don't know well, or somebody that you met at the grocery store, but that's what the Lord does. Just this week, at the beginning of the week, these two friends of mine called me. They have a large family of 15, 10 sisters, 5 brothers. The youngest sister, who lives with her mother, their mother, and has lived with them always. She never got married because of her special needs. And just this week, she was diagnosed with aggressive breast cancer. Needless to say, this family was devastated. When they called me early in the morning, I had an agenda. And you know what I did? I prayed and I said, let's drop all that.
Well, I think it's certainly
Who
time.
cares? This is where I need to be. And this is what I need to do. And God gave me the time to accomplish the rest.
I'm sure you were
Later
such a
or the
comfort.
next day.
No, I think you were such a comfort in that. I think we all have to judge, life is all about choices and trying to, listen to God's voice or the small voice inside us to let us know what direction we're supposed
I
to
think we
take.
need
But I'm
to
sure-
learn to discern.
Exactly. There was a question in the back row here.
Yes, I have a father who will actually turn 93 years old tomorrow. And he's come to live with me because he's had some health challenges. And it's been extremely hard for the both of us. For him, because he's ex-military and you know how that is. He's used to doing his own thing. And my mother has passed several years ago, so it's just been him. And he has these bouts where he'll just cry. And it's hard for me to see him like that, and I'm getting emotional now just talking about it because it's really hard. And I need to know what type of coping strategies or something that you can suggest that I do, because when I see him like that, I don't know how to accept it, and then we're just a hot mess, basically. He's crying, I'm crying because he's crying, and I really don't know how to deal with it. Oftentimes I'll call and I'll vent to my friend about some things that may go on in the house, but I just really don't know how to deal with it. Can you suggest some coping mechanisms or something I can do?
I would say, you know, one thing that we do not do as a people is grieve well. And so in losing, in your dad aging, I have a 97-year-old mom, and I know a lot of us are caregivers, and we don't do our own grief work about watching our parents decline. And so journaling is a great way, and if you look at the grief process, there's anger, there's sadness, there's shock, there's denial, there's stages of grief that we go through. And so it's okay to say, I hate this, I hate that I have to see my dad like this isn't fair. It's okay to journal out those feelings and cry and grieve that, because then when you go in to be with him, you're much more calm, and your grief is processed for that day anyway, to hold space for him while he's there doing it, and you can be calm and you can be more stable in that space. So I really recommend, you know, just grieving, and in a way you're pre-grieving his death, because inevitably he will die. And we grieve in stages instead of when we lose them. It's when we're grieving that they've lost the ability to be there for us. We're grieving the ability of their own sadness. There's just so many things, and I would pick it apart, what you're specifically sad about or what you're specifically angry about.
I think you bring up such a good point, Stacy, with regards to a caregiver, because I'm in the same situation with my mother. And I think this is a good time to talk truly about what we can do, because we can only be helpful if we are in a good place, right? I find that if I'm overly tired or I'm overly stressed, then trying to deal with my mom and watching her decline, it affects me even more, and then we both. So what would you say, I'd love just the panel to address it, on what can we do to really help our physical health that obviously goes to help our mental health? I mean, what are the things that during the day, we are complex creatures, we humans, right? What is it that we can do that can help us get in a better place, that we can deal with all the stresses that we have to deal with, whether it's caring for another or job or children or what have you? Anybody want to start? Marissa?
Okay, there's so many things. But first of all, I need to address you. I just want to say it's powerful for you to even speak about your experiences at all, let alone in a space like this. I think, again, that's the power of vulnerability, and the fact that right off the bat, I mean, so many of us can share your experience. And I think that plays such a huge role, talking about it, plays such a huge role in everyone else kind of being like, oh, okay, me too. Yes, me too. And just normalizes the experience, because it's so easy, like we talked about, to be isolated and to think, oh my gosh, I'm the only one who has to cry with my dad, and you know, we all experience these hard things. I think the more we can have safe people to talk about it, safe spaces to talk about things, and places where we can be validated, you know, right? Because I think it's really easy, and I could think of some people from my life before where they would be quick to kind of minimize how I felt, or quick to put a piece of scripture that I was supposed to magically feel better after hearing it, you know, but really spaces where you can just grieve and be open about that. But I think as far as strategies goes, I know I'm a big proponent of just having that list. I mean, it's literally on my phone at all times. I call it my spiritual bank account. Some people talk, you know, toolbox, whatever you want to use. Kind of having that list of things that are really grounding and helpful and healthy for me.
Like what?
So for me, one of the big things that I don't do often enough that is really helpful is meditation. One thing that was brought up at the last session, I think is really important to address, is that does not mean I just magically sit and then empty my thoughts and then I'm just in this bliss. No. The whole practice is really about centering myself on either prayer or a piece of scripture, or for me, I like to visualize like my ideal self. So one of the things I do in therapy is picking a thing I want to work on today. So I think last week when I did it, it was about, I just pictured serenity, like what it felt like to be in serenity. So I pictured myself just like on a hammock and there was water rushing underneath me, and it was just kind of like being able to center myself. I'm like, okay, what does this feel like? Letting my body kind of follow that train. And there's great apps for that. So one that was discussed in the last session is Centering Prayer app. I use an Insight Timer. Gives you a bunch of different options for ones you can use that have music, or with mantras, which again, mantra is pretty much just like a phrase or thing that kind of is grounding for you. It's not some woo-woo kind of thing unless you want it to be. And again, talking with supportive systems and having those key people to rely on. A gratitude list has been really helpful for me. That's something I've been doing with my friends actually, where at least during the work week we'll send each other things that we're grateful for. I try to shoot for at least 5 things, and I find the more I practice, the more I can list. Because it sounds really, it sounds like it wouldn't have that much impact, but the power of speaking the positive things that are happening in life, we can always find that. It just takes so much more intention. It's so much easier to rattle off all the terrible things that are going on. But there is, actual science behind the fact that it takes longer for the positive experiences to kind of be felt in our bodies and our minds. So having that be a part of practice, I think, is really helpful too. And again, that scan, check in with my body, and then repeating it, affirmation to myself, like, okay, like I am safe, I am taken care of. Yeah, those are some of the things. I could go on for a long time.
Jill, did you have anything you wanted to add?
I just have to kind of go back to the power of your sharing that. And there's a part of me, and maybe this speaks to you, maybe it doesn't. If it doesn't, just toss it out. How precious, though, for you and your dad to be crying together. That's a gift that you're giving him, that he's not alone in his sadness. You are sad with him. And so, I'm getting teary and talking.
Thanks, me too.
Because that's how many of us have cried with our dads? That's a special time. Now, at some point it gets old, and maybe that's where you're at, but honor that your dad, this tough military guy, is crying in front of you. That, for him to allow himself to be vulnerable means he trusts you so much. That is like such respect and such honoring of you, that is really precious. And so it sucks, but it's also kind of precious. And but if it gets old, reaching out is the right thing to do. And
We
thank
need
you
a
for
box
your
of tissues.
Now we're all
This is a mental health thing.
But, one thing I think all of these things bring to light also the fact that we need to allow ourselves the time to do these things. I think we, especially women, we have so many buckets, right? And we just keep going, and this person needs this, and this person, then it's time to do that. And I know I struggle with that, and I think I'm getting a little better because that comes with age, where you just give yourself the chance to just be present, to do what you need to do that meditation app, to go take that walk, to sit and read a book for 30 minutes and have a cup of coffee and not feel any guilt about it, because we can only be good for the others in our life if we're in a place, right? So I think that would be my one takeaway as I'm hearing all of you. Okay, well this is, sorry about that. You obviously hit a chord. Okay, so Jill and I are in a home group together, and when she does the prayer, we're always in tears. She's got a very amazing voice and ability to cut right to the chase. So one of the questions that is here in my basket is, when you're in therapy, when do you know that you're done? And I think I'll preface that a little bit with the fact of how to find a therapist. I mean, we talked about, different resources and so forth, but I think that would be the first question. And then it is one of those things, are you ever finished? I mean, are you healed and you say, okay, I'm ready to move on? So if we can address sort of those sort of simple questions that I'm sure other people have. Stacy, do you want to start maybe?
Well, I always tell people, finances are important, so start with your insurance, start with what's covered, and start narrowing that down, and talking to people, interview them, ask them some questions. If they don't have time to answer a few questions, as busy as I am, a potential client, is asking me questions, I'm gonna listen to and answer her questions. So if someone's can't do that for you, then I'd say move on. We live in an area where therapy is readily available and very plentiful. So if you're in a small town where it wasn't, you might have to settle. But I don't think we have to settle. So I would say start with insurance. Start with getting a good feel. Read. Most people are on the web or have a web presence online, and you can read about what their philosophy is, whether they're Christian or not. If you have a really specific problem, sometimes it's more important to have someone that's a specialist in the problem than it is for them to be a Christian, because you can get support here at church. So keep that in mind. But if you can get both, all the better.
What if you have no insurance coverage for?
So you ask people about a sliding scale, based upon your income. One thing for me, back when I was in my old broke days, is that I never got true professional help. And it is an investment that is worth it. Most of us spend money on silly things, and if you add it up, that $100, $150, $200 fee is not that much. And I say that knowing that is a lot for most of you, but the payoff is so great. And people don't, sometimes a divorce is much more expensive, or a trip to the hospital is much more expensive. So some of that proactive care is really worth it. And then to just jump into when therapy is over, is I think you have to be proactive in your therapy process to say what you want when you go in. It's not like fix me, it's I'm coming in to work on this issue. And so then do we want to work on the next issue? Do I want to invest in the next issue, or do I not want to invest in the next issue? And I think it's a conversation. I feel better, I feel good in my functioning. And asking for interaction, but that therapist is not God, we're human beings. So you invest in your own sense of knowing, what you can do and what you can't do.
And I think an important point is, and I'll get that in just a second for this question, but one important point is sometimes it might not be a good fit. And I think that's important. I've known, I had a friend who went through a whole lot, and she went to a therapist, and she said, well, I tried therapy, it didn't work. Well, maybe it wasn't the right connection. So I do think that if it's something you are thinking about or would like to explore, and maybe you go and see someone and it's not a great fit, then find someone else if it's something you want to pursue, because relationships are relationships. Sometimes you click and sometimes you don't. So I would just say that my personal experience is if it's not a good fit, move on and find someone who might be better suited. Maria, you had a question?
This question is for you, Stacy, regarding what you just stated. Do you know if that applies to just any case outside the mental health area, but to any other cases of health that insurance or whatever that you mentioned?
Oh, the sliding
The
scale.
sliding scale?
Yeah, well, the sliding scale, but I think you mentioned something else after that.
About what?
No, I don't know, I'm just asking you.
So I think ask. I think we shouldn't be scared to ask on the
Yes.
phone. If we're looking for any kind of medical, do you have a cash discount?
Right.
What is that?
A cash pay, do you
Oh,
get
cash,
a
I thought you
discount?
said-
Yeah.
Is it a
Gotcha.
discount for
The
paying
reason I'm
cash?
asking is for my friends who do not have an insurance to
Right.
go to the Methodist Hospital and be treated by the team of doctors who operated on Lisa Mayhew, who had breast cancer, as most of you know. And I happened to speak with Mike Mayhew, our former pastor, and he gave me all the info. But when they called, they don't accept their insurance. And so they were referred to Herman Memorial, to whoever. And
So
Mike
some-
said to me, Methodist Hospital is the leading hospital.
Some have charitable care, and you just have to ask those
Yeah,
questions.
maybe they just didn't ask the question.
Right.
Thank you, thank you.
Did you want?
So yeah, as far as cost goes, I think, like, we talked about me being honest about like what is reasonable for you. I agree, it's an investment. I started out with, when I worked at UT Health with a therapist in network, have moved a couple jobs since then, out of network. I spend $350 a month on therapy, and it was a lot more. And it's worth it for me, but again, I've been able to work that out. That doesn't always happen for everybody. So sliding scale is important, and one resource that's on your sheet is called Open Path Collaborative, I think is what it's called. Collective, that was close. Basically what it is it's a resource for sliding scale therapists, for interns, so that way you can still get care at a lower cost with people, which is a good place to start. And Psychology Today is another great resource to find the right therapist. You can narrow it by insurance, coverage, et cetera, et cetera. But yeah, not being afraid to just switch things up, I think is really important. Because yeah, the first time's not always going to be the best fit. That's one of the hardest things about the field. But I think one of the best things is that it's not linear, right? There's no prescriptive, this kind of therapy is going to work for everybody. It's going to be very different. So we have to kind of let ourselves be creative with it.
Thank you. Jill?
And just one little tidbit, some therapists work like, we're gonna tackle this problem and we're gonna see it through, and that's great, and that's actually the best. After you've been with a therapist for a period of time, and you've done that, you have their trust, and you feel like they get you, and they've been helpful to you, you might go back periodically, like, you do your primary care provider. Oh, okay, now my kid's getting married, and oh my God, I'm doing what? And that once you've kind of established a baseline, it might just be that you finish, it's not like you finish, and that's the rest of your life, but then they're like your go-to person when the troubles come back. One of my teachers was talking about people have signature symptoms, and when he was a kid, I think he stuttered. And so whenever he started stuttering, he realized, oh, that means I need to get back, relook at what's going on in my life. So you may have some signature symptom. It might be not sleeping, it might be eating too much, it might be, but when you see yourself slipping back into your signature symptom, that would be a time maybe to go back for a checkup, or a touch base, or whatever. And maybe it'll be an extended period, and maybe it will be a short period. Because it's really custom. It should be.
I think that brings up such a good point. We go and have our physical, and we go check in with our primary care, and we may be fine, but we're just going in to, have a checkup. But you're right, life is all about changes and different stages, and so it's wonderful to have somebody that you can check in with if you do see a signature symptom, or you realize that something's just sort of gnawing away at you, and it's time to just take check of your mental health as well as your physical health. And I wanted to thank Jill. She put all of this information, and this is just an amazing resource. I'm really excited to have this.
Marissa helped too.
Yeah, thank you, Marissa. And
I know nothing about Instagram.
But just the opportunity to know that there are, the web is obviously a wonderful place for information, especially if you know where to go, right? Does anybody else we're getting close to our end.
Yes, do you have any more of those sheets?
I think, are we all out? If there's some more over there. So yeah, this is a great takeaway. I didn't have any more questions that anybody had addressed, but we've opened up so many different topics. Is there anything more that anybody wanted to springboard? Yes.
I just want to make a comment when she was talking about grief earlier. I think this little symbol down here is just about perfect.
That sums it up.
Yeah, it's just about perfect.
Thank you for noticing that.
Oh, that is true. I didn't see that.
Not linear.
No.
You go back and forth. Another thing I wanted to mention, that first question about how do I set boundaries without hurting someone. if you're having trouble with boundaries, which we're all loving, caring Christian women, and so I would guess that there's a big boundary issue for a lot of you, like me. Cloud and Townsend, Henry Cloud and John Townsend write a book called Boundaries. And in there he talks about the difference between harming someone and hurting someone. So a boundary might hurt someone, but does it harm them? And in hurting someone, that's not our problem. If we hurt someone, it may actually help them in the long run, but does it harm them? And then the other concept that I wanted to address was that in that book, they say that we are to help carry each other's burdens, because in doing so, we fulfill the law of Christ, like the word says, right? But each one must carry their own daily load. And sometimes we have a problem jumping in on people's daily load, rather than helping them carry a burden like cancer or something big that hits them all of a sudden. But when it becomes something chronic, then we're dealing with something else.
Those are great points. Does anybody else have any closing thoughts or anything that they wanted to address? We've talked about so many different areas, and anybody have any? We've solved it all, right?
I have a question about anxiety. I deal with a lot of girls that are just on the edge of adulthood. I've never heard so much about anxiety in my life.
Yes.
I go, well, make choice. Do you want to be anxious? Do you want to go start something positive to deal with it?
I think we
It's
do
all
live
this
in a
anxiety.
society, I think you're right. I have a 22-year-old, 23-year-old daughter, and she suffers from a lot of anxiety, and she says, all my friends have it. It's like the buzzword.
It's anxiety or trauma. I can't.
Right. Can we address the difference, and I know,
My
reading,
friend Elizabeth is swinging her phone, and I was
Yeah.
about to grab mine, I didn't have it. It's the phone.
Is it?
And so what we have, if you work with young women, to validate it versus say make a decision, because it is horrible the amount of pressure and stress they're under because of those devices. So listen, understand, tell me what your world's like. You know, validate them, hear what they're saying.
What do you mean it's the phone? Where is it coming from? I don't-
Social media.
I'm all
Social
for it.
media, how many likes,
Competition,
how many
YouTube.
likes I have, what I have to keep up with, boys saying,
school
send
pressures.
me pictures of you naked. I mean, I'm being real here. There is a lot of pressure out there to perform, to do a selfie, how good can I look? Well, I put a filter on it so I can
How
look
perfect
better.
can I be?
Yes.
How smart can I be?
Total availability all the time, you can't get
Yeah.
away. I mean,
So-
you can put it down. But 22-year-olds feel like they can't get away. You have to be accessible to your friends and their crisis and their likes and their Insta and their Snap and their, it's just.
It is the world they're in, so telling them just to deal with it isn't, that they can't. They don't have skills to do it. But to sit in there with them and help them come up with solutions to limit themselves or to see where it's coming from, why don't you try getting off social media for a week?
It's
How would
back to
that
the
be?
boundaries, I guess.
Absolutely.
Well, and I think.
Nobody tells them, yes, help in a crisis, but there's to carry their own load every day. I can't. It's hard.
What about self-help reading books, where you can read about how to improve and control your emotions? Are there not books like that out there? And what source of information would you search to find those types of self-help books?
Anything by Brene Brown.
Renee
She's
Brown,
the
is that your
goddess
baby?
of social work.
And I'm involved with a ministry called New Life, so you can look up newlife.com. And they have a call-in radio show with Christian counselors on it nationwide that ask, newlife.com.
Okay.
And we have workshops throughout the year across the nation with different subjects, but you can listen to the radio show either online or when it comes on between 12 and 1, and you find out so much about mental health and lots of resources.
Yeah, podcasts too, I mean, even just searching, I mean, I know that's how I like to learn a lot of different things. I know one thing that's helped my mom, Dr. Caroline Leaf has a few books out that has been really helpful for, it's all in your brain, right? And so that's been a big one.
It's your mind.
And I think that's, I mean, to piggyback a little bit on the anxiety, social media, I think it's so easy for us, if we don't struggle with that, to see that as a choice. It's not a choice. This is something that is literally felt in the body. It is, when you start spinning and cycling, you can't just will that. Even just me just like holding my breath for a minute, I'm like, oh, I'm feeling anxious, and I feel like my body's hard to take that charge off. And so I think following that trail again of like, where am I feeling this? How can I release it?
Right,
What am I
learning how to
feeling is
release.
really helpful. And I think the more we can ask ourselves or ask other people to evaluate, is this thought helping me? What's going to help? This was something that was talked a lot about in the last one. Like, how is this serving you? If it's serving you, wonderful. If it's not, release it and replace it with something else. And as far as the social media stuff goes, the reason I put the Instagram handles on there is because social media obviously I think can be a pit for all of us. But I also think if we are continuing to use it, obviously being mindful of our usage, but also that our feed that we're filling it with is positive. And so I have found a lot of great self-work and self-help in following people in spaces who are doing the work, who aren't the ones that are helping me on the path of comparison and, of other people being judging the typical things we know social media are terrible for. It can also be a positive force for good as well. So
I just have to jump in here. Sorry.
no.
So what I'm drawn to in your comments are that these girls are talking to you.
That's a good sign.
And so that is such a blessing. They trust you.
Not to be judgmental.
Yeah, they trust you.
Yeah.
And so just picking up on listen, and just wherever you see that they have some gift or some strength or some wisdom, you just tell them how impressed you are with, I can't believe you told them no when that was such a tough, just whatever you can find in the listening, affirm the anxiety, oh my goodness, that's so rough, whatever, but not so much of this is what you need to do, because we're so like, this is what we need to do.
Don't give advice.
Don't so much give advice, just listen, and look for whatever they are doing that's right. They might be doing a million things wrong. Find the one thing they're doing right and say, that is just amazing. I could never have done that. There's always something that person is doing that you can affirm. You just may have to listen a while, and you might have to be a little bit creative. But you don't have to be very patient. It has to be true. It has to be something that you really believe they are doing brilliantly at. And if you can use words like brilliant and that kind of stuff, that's good. Because they're desperate for affirmation. We are all desperate for affirmation. And so if you can find something that rings true to them, that they can own for themselves, that's probably the biggest gift you could give any of them.
This was a topic that came up in the last session, talking about anxiety and so forth, and there was kind of a news you can use takeaway that one of the women who was on the panel, and she teaches, she's younger and she teaches social work, and so she works with a lot of younger kids. She actually works with children who have terminal illness, and so it's a younger population. But she said something that I think we all really went, well, that's a good idea. And somebody's question was also about test taking. How do I help a college student who's going through exams and gets so anxious? And what she talked about that she really tells her students or anybody for that matter is when you're feeling not grounded, like if you were in a test-taking situation or you wanted to pass this on to someone, when you're sitting, you touch your feet to the ground and then you touch the ground and then touch your legs and touch the ground. And it's very simple, but she said what it can do is when your mind's all like this and you think you're floating, find a way, deep breathing, that it helped her students. Just that idea of stopping and placing yourself in this universe. And I thought that was really something helpful. I'm going to take that away. When I feel anxious, touch the ground. Just center yourself and give yourself that moment.
Like I'm here, that's all I am, that's all
Right,
I can
and I'm
be.
going to focus, and I'm just going to try and do the very best I can, and I'm going to try and stop all of these these feelings, and I thought, we all need that, because we all can go from, oh my gosh, and then we pivot to something else, and we pivot, so stop.
Can we, the other thing I wanted to reflect from your thing, and again, stealing from the earlier session, Marissa was alluding to it, but the same woman
Oh, that's
was
right.
talking about a triangle, and I've heard this a million times, but I've never heard about it. You've always got your fingers, right? And your fingers like this make a triangle. Often we focus on the tip of the triangle, which is the feelings, right? But you've got to really look at the base. And so the base is beliefs, thoughts. And I'm doing it backwards here. The feelings are a product of the beliefs. And the beliefs are, I'm not enough, I'm not good enough, I'll never make it, I'm worthless. Those are the beliefs that often fuel anxiety. The beliefs are what trigger the feelings. And then the feelings go to behavior. And sometimes the behavior is even more out of control because you're losing it. And so then the behaviors then fuel more thoughts that fuel more feelings, and you're going around and around and around. You got to go back to the thoughts and start there. Analyze what is it that's fueling the feelings. And so she teaches the kids this. We can all do this. I'm going to be doing this. I just drew it. Going back to the thoughts, what's causing the anxiety? And just listening for the person to figure out what is it that's fueling the anxiety? What are their thoughts about themselves usually?
Or what are our
Or their
thoughts?
prospects,
Yeah,
or
when
what
she
are
said
they?
she walks around like this, she'll go, okay, I got it now. You know, I
Yeah.
mean, you know, it is, it's sort of a self-check, isn't it?
It's a great check.
And
So,
really quickly, one thing to lower anxiety. Anxiety is always about the future and the depression or the past, but being present, the grounding grounds you in the present. So if you look around and you see 5 things that you see with your eyes, if you engage your senses, 5 things you see. I see a whole lot of crosses. I see a turquoise piece of paper, and you describe them. You don't judge it. You don't say pretty, ugly. You just describe it. 4 things you feel. I feel warmth from my legs. I feel a rough table. 3 things you smell. 3 things you hear, sorry. 3 things you hear. And you've got to be really still and present. I hear chairs creaking. I hear humming out there. And I heard a voice. 2 things that you smell. So make your essential oils or coffee or whatever. And then 1 thing you taste. It will ground you in the present and it will reduce your anxiety immediately.
Love that. See,
Okay,
I've learned so much.
so
5 things you see, 4 things you tactile, feel. You've got to actually feel. What are your fingers feeling? Not what you think you
See the
feel.
chair.
And then 3 things that you hear, 2 things that you, 3 things you hear, 2 things you smell, 1 thing you taste.
All right, well, you know what, I think that we have gone over, class is over, but I have to say, I hope that you all enjoyed this as much as I did. Share the knowledge. Really appreciate it, y'all.
sorry we didn't take everybody's questions. There was one or more.
Well, and now it's lunch, and Pastor Michelle is here to give us. Thank you. Yes.
Green's my favorite color and hearts are my favorite. It was so perfect for me. Oh, I do. We don't have cats or dogs. We need to.
My other thoughts. If you do this, I will, maybe not long term, but if everything else fails, I cry.
Oh,